Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All discussion of Family Guy will cease now. Just kidding. That was. We're going to be talking about the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. And you know what? Sadly, we might not even finish it tonight. I know you're saying, Father Theodore, this is part 3. How much time can you possibly spend? Well, I could spend even more time if I wanted to. So that's that. So remember, we were talking last class in part 2, we were talking about Jesus Christ said famously that he did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but he came not to abolish, but to fulfill. And we said he means two things by that. One, he means to fulfill the law by actually completing the law, by living out and enacting every single precept of the law in his own life. He's the only human being who ever lived that fulfilled the law, that lived out all the commandments of the law perfectly. So in that sense, he fulfilled them. But he also came to fulfill the law in another sense, and that's in a sense more to us, in that he came to show us to give us the complete law, to add what was missing from the law. And what was missing, and this is, by the way, a big division. You might not think it, but this is a big division. I've heard just, Jewish people on the internet talk about. This is the big division between us and the Jews, is they think the Torah was perfect. They think that, the 612, 613 commandments as they came down in the first 5 books of the Bible are complete unto themselves. And when Jesus comes along saying that he came to fulfill the law, and he's saying something fundamentally at odds with modern Judaism, which is the Judaism of the Pharisees. Keep in mind that the Old Testament prophets did say a new covenant was coming. That is very much in multiple prophecies. So I think it's completely consistent with the original Old Testament witness. But this is, anyway, it's a side point. It's not relevant to anything. But Jesus Christ came to fulfill the law to show us the complete law. What is missing from the law that Jesus adds? It's the inner dimension. It's the inner dimension. So the law originally in the 10 Commandments told us, "Thou shalt not kill." But Jesus extends that. He shows us the inner dimension, that it's not just about killing, but even the impulses to anger that rise up within you without good reason are included in that commandment. So you can't even be angry with someone without a good reason. That in and of itself is the sin of murder on a lesser degree. Okay, you don't lock someone up and throw them in jail because they committed they had angry thoughts, but it is the same sin. So the impulse that caused you to just, I don't know, say, yell at someone or flipping the bird or something, in these circumstances could, in very different circumstances, actually cause you to commit murder. A lot of our behavior is restrained by our cultural customs, by the fact that we're worried we'd get caught, something like that. The example I like to use is the Russian Revolution is one of the most horrifying events like ever in the history of man. We don't kind of realize it because it was overshadowed, and it was widely understood to be that, but it was kind of overshadowed by like World War II and the Holocaust. But before that, it was the Russian Revolution was understood to be like one of the greatest tragedies in human history because of just how absolutely destructive and how many millions of people died. And one of the things that happened in the Russian Revolution that I talk about is there was widespread cannibalism. I mean, there was so much famine, so much starvation, that a lot of people turned to eating other human beings just to survive. And this was, the capital of Orthodox Christianity. This was the par excellence Orthodox empire in the world, and just a few years of famine caused them to become absolute savages, and to do things that we in ordinary life wouldn't even dream of. So that's the example I like to use to represent to people. You don't know what you're capable of because of the passions that are within you. A lot of, your restraint, a lot of our good behavior is just because, we live in civilized society. We don't need to kill. We don't need to steal or anything. Take that all away, and we'd actually see what sort of creatures we'd become. And many of us, I think, would be surprised at the evil that lurks within us. So this is what Jesus is coming to heal. He's not just trying to create a good society with good laws for us, but he's actually coming to heal even those impulses, which in different situations would cause us to commit all kinds of heinous crimes. So that's why so there's no sin you're not capable of committing, as long as if you're a human being with blood in your veins, until you've been perfected and purified by the grace of the Holy Spirit. There's no sin you're not capable of committing if the stars aligned just right, or circumstances turned a certain way. So that should always humble us. But anyway, that's what Jesus means when he says that to be angry is to commit murder in your heart, because it's the same impulse. It's the same drive. These impulses or urges or drives to sin, we in the Orthodox Church have come to call the passions. But it's fundamentally the same, even though Jesus doesn't use the word in exactly that way, it's fundamentally the same reality he's describing. So he tells us anger. We commit murder in our hearts when we are angry with people for no reason, or when we swear at them, or when we call them names or something like that. So all of these fall under the commandment not to murder. Now, today, chapter 5, verse 27, we're going to move on to the next commandment. So that was the 6th commandment. So, by the way, the first how many of the 10 commandments are there? Well, there's 10 of them. The first 4 deal with our relationship with God. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not create an image for yourself and bow down. So you will not worship idols. We shall not take the Lord's name in vain. You shall honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. So the first, so the 10 commandments are all about preserving right relationships in the world. So the first 4 are oriented to preserving a right relationship with God. The last 6 are about preserving a right relationship with human beings. And then the first commandment, number 5, is honor your mother and father, that it'll be well with you. Number 6, and so Jesus skipped those first 5, and now he's telling us about the latter 5. And so the number 6 is thou shalt not commit murder. Number 7 is thou shalt not commit adultery. So now Jesus has moved on from commandment number 6 to commandment number 7. You shall not commit adultery. You have heard it said from those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. So we're moving on to the commandment of adultery. And adultery obviously has the very specific meaning of cheating on your spouse, sleeping with someone who's not your spouse. But this commandment was always understood to include all types of sexual behavior that were not within a man-woman marriage. That's how it was always read and understood historically by the ancient Israelites and by the early church and so on and so forth. So adultery means anything that's any sexual activity that's outside of husband and wife. Just like the commandment not to murder probably included all types of what we would call assault as well, right? It's not just like you shall not murder, but you can beat him into an inch of his life and he's okay. That's kind of included under the heading. Likewise, you can commit all kinds of sexual immorality. You can't get away with it by saying, well, it wasn't adultery, I wasn't married. It was against God's law. That was how it was always understood. So I just want to specify that. So whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. We can see this is the same principle. This is the inner dimension of the law being revealed to us. The same principle behind Jesus's commandment surrounding anger, right? Even if you don't go through with the act of killing someone, you have had a movement in your heart. You have had an impulse. You have an urge that is the same one that causes you to commit murder. Likewise, if you lust after someone, and of course it's talking about men lusting after women, but the same applies to women, obviously. If you indulge mentally sexual desire for someone, it is the same impulse that would, in different circumstances, lead you to commit a physical act of adultery, even if you don't actually do anything physical with that person. But keep in mind, mind you, the fathers differentiate between the spontaneous movement of the mind, which some of them call propassion, pre-passion, and passion itself, which is when we willingly engage. And this is, I think, an important distinction, because all of us human beings, and of course, male sexuality is somewhat different than female sexuality, but I think fundamentally we have the impulse that we see a attractive, healthy member of the opposite sex, and we have an impulse within us. We react to it in some way, involuntarily. If that's just how we're wired. It's one of our deepest rooted instincts. That in and of itself is not a sin. All right, you'll be in all kinds of situations where you'll encounter that, whether in person or like on TV or something, where you're not necessarily seeking it out, but someone attractive comes along and suddenly you felt the feeling that you did not intend to feel, that you didn't seek out. It's just there. That spontaneous movement of the mind, according to the fathers, is not a sin in and of itself. It's when you start to indulge it. When you start to, when you look at that person and you start to stare, or you start to think, and the wheels of your mind get turning. And it's associated with a certain sweetness. You enjoy that, even if it's not like full on fantasizing about someone. You start thinking about them and just letting your attention drift to them. You have started to. That's when it starts to become a sin. Again, it's not equal to actually going out and committing adultery with them. But the moment you start engaging with them, the moment you start thinking about them, the moment you start focusing your attention on them and engaging with that impulse in that way, then you've begun to sin. It goes from suggestion, which you are not guilty of, to consent. The devil has prompted you with something, and you have agreed, you have accepted the thought, and now you're starting to fantasize or starting to think or whatever. And then of course, further than that is the deed. Just because you fantasized in your head, you're guilty of something, but you're not guilty of going out and having done it. And of course, more fathers will actually differentiate even smaller, even smaller scales. It's one thing when you consent to the thought. It's another thing when you start making plans. It's another thing when you go out of your house and start trying to act on them. And then it's a final thing when you actually get there and do the deed itself. So these are all different, levels of sin, and each level is worse than the last, and each previous level is not as bad as the one that follows it. But it's a stage pass. Process. No one wakes up in the morning and said, "I think I'm going to commit adultery today." They just like, it seems like a good idea. That would be fun, huh? It is. You first have the thought, this person is attractive. Then you get to the thought, yeah, they really are attractive. You start thinking about them. Then you get to the thought, maybe I should do something about it. Then I will do something about it. Then I start to make plans. See, it's a stage-like thing, and so you should be aware of these processes in your mind. And what Jesus is talking about is not the initial impulse, but everything after that. The initial impulse, you find yourself attracted to someone, you're not guilty of that. It's just the human condition. But everything after that, it gets worse and worse. And the fathers also make the point is that the pleasure at first is not very strong. The more you indulge, the more you fantasize, the more pleasure you're deriving from it, and subsequently the harder it is to quit. So the easiest thing to do is to cast these thoughts from your mind right at the first. You see the person with the swimsuit or the yoga pants or whatever, you just look away. Like that's the first thing you need to do. Then that'll save you from a lot of pain, a lot more pain in trying to rip up the thought later in your mind. So the sooner we kill the temptation, the easier. And this is the path to purity of heart. By the way, this all links up with Jesus' previous teaching here in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And we said that he was talking about very something specific, not metaphorical. The heart for the ancient people is the same thing as for us, the mind. And when your mind is pure and you only have good thoughts and you're totally rooted in reality and not in fantasy or imagination, then you actually see God. Then you perceive and behold God in a real way. But the more your mind is polluted by angry thoughts, by lustful thoughts, the less possible that is for you. So that's what he's trying to get us to, that point. He's trying to help us. He's not just trying to condemn us for being human. He's trying to show us a path that actually leads to our liberation. So looking at a woman with lust for her is already committed adultery with her in her heart. It's pretty straightforward, right? And by the way, some people say, the Bible never talks about pornography, so that's okay. No, it very much does, and it's this right here. In the next verse, he talks about it's better for you that one of your members perish than your whole body be cast into hell. It's a sin. You are lusting when you're engaging with material like that. You are lusting after a woman or a man that you're not married to. And that is wrong. And that's an offense to them. And I think it actually does ruin marriages. I think the reason for that, especially I can, understand. Obviously, I think women are wired a little bit differently, and this particular temptations they succumb to are a little bit different. But certainly for the male side, the problem, especially with internet pornography, is you can always find a woman who is more attractive than your wife, or who you like better than your wife at that moment. And I think continually indulging that sort of thing will cause you to resent your wife, because she can never live up to what you can concoct in your mind, and that's totally unfair to her, and it's a terrible sin. And I think it's a very widespread phenomenon that is not talked about very much. And I understand why we don't want to talk about it, because it's uncomfortable, but it has more terrible consequences than I think we realize, and it is a total social disease that needs to be dealt with in some meaningful way. It is a huge problem that is poisoning the hearts and minds of men, but women as well. Yes.
And of course, so you can kind of consider porn to be right there between lust and idolatry.
Yeah, there's a lot that's been said about that, absolutely, because there's a sort of thing going on with the image. You are devoting yourself to an image. You are devoting yourself. It's not quite the same as worshiping an idol, but there's definitely a kinship there. You are devoting your mental and your spiritual energy to something evil and ugly, which is
I've heard it said it's the iconography of Satan.
It is the iconography of Satan. Yeah, it's the iconography of Satan, because you're watching fundamentally the misuse and abuse of the image of God. What's the image of God? It's a human being. So if you wouldn't pay to watch an icon being desecrated, then you shouldn't ever watch pornography. Not to mention, whosoever looks at a woman. I think Father St. John Chrysostom made the point that women who, and of course this follows equally for men, but women who adorn themselves or display themselves in such a way so as to intentionally attract sexual attention are guilty of participating in this sin in a certain sense. It's on the one hand, yes, men should not be looking, but on the other hand, if you are setting, and again, I don't exactly know how women approach and experience this thing, but if you are setting out, I want men to look at me and lust after me, then you are guilty in a sense of trying to bring that sin about too. It takes, and I know women will get hit on by creeps no matter what they wear. So that's not what I'm talking about. And it's not the same as, just looking, dressing well or looking pretty or something, or beautiful or what have you. That's something somewhat different. If you specifically want people to desire you sexually, and you're dressing yourself in a way to provoke that in them, then you are, participating in that sin. Yes.
I think it ties in, like, people, the verse that everybody loves to quote about modesty, like it in that specific time, it's talking about like adorning yourself with like flaunting your wealth, basically. So it's the same way as like if you're having nice things is not bad, but if you're flaunting your wealth to look down on other people, it's in the same strain, I guess.
Right. It's good to dress nice. It's good to be presentable. That's something Jesus actually talks about elsewhere in the Sermon on the Mount. When you're fasting, wash your face, dress nicely, so that people don't know. So it's not a sin to want to look good. Let's say it's a sin to be really narcissistic about it and really be vain about it. It's a sin also to try to attract sexual attention from people you're not married to. If that makes any sense. And of course, I'm sure it applies to men in certain ways in certain times, and that's also very much wrong. Yeah. I mean, if that's your goal as a man, you set out, you want women to like lust after you or what have you, then you're doing wrong, and then you're it's not right. Yes.
It stems from like societal ignorance on proper courtship.
Mm-hmm.
I think modern men and women, at least of our generation, have been kind of lacking in the courtship department, and they're like, well, I guess I have a body, I'll just use that, but they've kind of lost maybe the emotional depth.
Yeah.
Of, like actually getting to know somebody, maybe also because of the pornography, like that idolatry and fantasizing makes you like ignore the emotional depth of the individual, or ignore their humanity, and it kind of just paints them as an object.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think it's something that's actually been studied. I think the word used sometimes like the pornification of our culture, but young women learn to objectify themselves. It's actually a phenomenon that's been studied by psychologists called self-objectification. They learn, many women learn rather young that if I present myself in a certain way on social media or whatever, I'm going to get a whole lot of likes and I'm going to get a whole lot of attention. And it for some of them, it's like crack. And they're learning bad habits from people who do bad things because it's just out there in our society. And likewise, the men feed into it completely because they give that attention and they encourage it and they want more of it and they can't get enough. So it's like this feedback loop that men behave like pigs and the women act promiscuous, and that encourages the men to behave more like pigs, which encourages the women to act more promiscuous. It's just like everyone's guilty. Everyone like there's no. It's not that the men are bad, the women are innocent. It's not that the women are bad and the men are innocent. Everyone's bad. That's how I think anyway. Yes.
Of course, that particular phenomenon is kind of an extension of going from being a selfless culture to a selfish culture.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said that all of this intertwines. Our consumerism, our materialism, the way we're obsessed with ourself and our image. These things all feed into it, and they're part of the same sort of nexus of just like a diseased society. Anywho, okay. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it far from you. For it is more profitable for you than for one of your members to perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. So this is immediately joined to the thing about lust, but this is also just a general pronouncement that if there's anything in your life, this is not talking about literal self-amputation, because in reality your hand cannot cause you to sin, your eye cannot cause you to sin. It's anything in your life that makes it easier for you to sin or inclines you to sin or is a temptation for you. Get rid of it. Absolutely excise it from your life and throw it far away from you. Eye and hands correspond to contemplation in action and action more than physical appendages. So an eye is, seeing, especially in the ancient world, and like the Greek language is connected with knowing or thinking. So what you see, what you indulge, that's connected to the idea of lust and things like that. What you think about. You should even control your thoughts. You need to be aware even of the things you think about day to day, because these kind of define your character. And if they're bad contemplations you have, things that are not helpful or not good or harmful for you, you need to get rid of them. You need to cast them out. And action, anything associated with deeds like habits needs to be ripped up and torn away from you, no matter how much it hurts, because the alternative is hell. I mean, to be cast into hell. This is extremely high stakes. One of the things, modern people lament is they feel like they don't have a purpose in life. But in reality, there is very much a purpose to life. And it's much higher stakes than kind of you might think day to day. But eternal blessed joy or eternal suffering, alienation, and torment. I mean, this is cute. Your life has a whole ton of meaning, for better or for worse. But these are really your choices matter. My choices matter. All of our choices are hugely consequential, and that's why sometimes we have to do extreme things within reason. Sometimes, there's such a thing as the Bible says, zeal not according to knowledge. Sometimes just because something is extreme doesn't mean it's good. Sometimes we do extreme things and it's ridiculous, but sometimes it's totally warranted. And so any attachment that inclines us to sin, the fathers in reading this passage actually see more than anything, think more than anything is about relationships. So people in our life that incline us to sin. And this is, well known even in the modern day. What is the first thing you do if someone is trying to recover from drug or alcohol abuse? You cut off your dealer. You cut off the people you drink with. You stop going to bars. You cut off you won't get away from it, because the next time you hang out with them, they're going to offer you something that's going to get you right back into the cycle. It might sound harsh. It might feel harsh if you're trying to recover from that, and you have to cut all these people out of your life. But that's the only way. And that's true with any sin, any sort of bad habit that we have. Now, all of us, are Christian, who have Christian friends, or we have well-behaved friends. Everyone's committing some level of sin. So it's not like, if you cut out everyone in your life who is a sinner, you'd have no friends left. This is, relating to the stronger things, right? But it applies even to family members, even to mothers and fathers, even to children, if they become, such a serious stumbling block to you. A classic example is parents who forbid you from becoming a Christian or from getting baptized or anything. Difficult as it is to say or to hear, that what the gospel says is you have to leave them and come be baptized and come worship Jesus Christ. And that I feel the worst for people who are dealing with converts from Muslim backgrounds, because that's the religion of Islam stipulates that. But they'll be blessed for that. They'll receive extra grace from that. For those of us, more grace than those of us who did not have to make those sacrifices. So, anywho, but yeah, we to cut it off and cast it far from you. I mean, he's not talking about literal amputation, but he's talking about making really big changes in our life if that's what is necessary. Okay, so that's verses 27 through 30. Any questions, comments, concerns so far? Oh, okay. Now it's furthermore, it has been said. So we can consider this, I believe, an extension of. Yeah. The one more thing is I just want to say in terms of your right hand, this is, I think, cut off your right hand or pluck out your right eye. Why does it come immediately after the commentary on adultery? Well, the first thing you have to do if you're confessing someone who's confessing adultery is the only way they can be forgiven is first they have to cut off the relationship. You can't come to confession before a priest and then be absolved and then go back into your lover's arms or whatever. It don't work like that. And some people get, obviously really, really attached to the people with whom they commit adultery. Tough. It's you have to rip, even if it's like ripping your heart out of your chest, it's a sin. Anyway. And that's why, we can't get too into hallmark ideas about love or what love is, because it's perfectly possible to get butterflies in your stomach or heartsick over someone you're not married to and you're married to someone else. And no matter how beautiful or pure or uplifting those feelings feel, it's a sin. It's wrong. Rip them out of your chest. If you're married, that's it, Anywho. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. So consider this an extension of Jesus's discussion of the seventh commandment. We're still talking about adultery and marriage. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. So just the first one comment I want to say is this. Christian monogamy for the ancient world and for world historical is rather radical. And is one of the unique things that maybe defines Christian civilization, because many, many societies, even ancient Israelite society, but ancient European society, African society, East Asian society, were generally like softly polygamous. If you were a man and you had enough money and resources, you could have as many wives and or concubines as you wanted. That was okay as long as you could afford them, basically. And Christianity has always been hardcore leaning into one man, one woman for life, period. Oh, and really, and a lot of societies were very loosey-goosey about divorce. Even Jewish society and Islamic society, even though these are traditional religious societies, they're not super duper strict about divorce. And Christianity was always really, really against divorce, not necessarily categorically banning it, but really, really negative about it. So this is one of the unique defining things about Christianity, is just how high and sacred monogamous marriage is and how important it is to Jesus. What is the whole thing about a certificate of divorce? I mean, it sounds like right here, Jesus Christ is changing the law, because Moses said because the Torah said it was okay to divorce, and Jesus is saying, no. It's wrong. And Jesus explains elsewhere in the Gospels, I forget where, but he explained that the reason it was allowed in the days of Moses was because of the hardness of people's hearts. So something about sort of the savagery. You think about the Torah, the law of Moses was revealed to a Bronze Age, Iron Age society, very primitive, very impoverished conditions compared to anything else. The laws had to be really sort of difficult and strict and severe. And that's why, we look at the law of Moses sometimes and we get uncomfortable, very liberal use of the death penalty, there's stuff about slavery in there, so on and so forth, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and we get uncomfortable. But that was what it took to hold a civilization together back then. That is what was, the difference between life and death for them was building these social structures, even if they had to be really harsh. Yes.
If someone commits adultery and their spouse wants a divorce after that, the person who committed the adultery, are they allowed to remarry after?
They are, but they have to go through some kind of For sure, the church definitely differentiates in a divorce. The Orthodox Church definitely differentiates between the person who cheats and the person who was cheated on. They're not equal. However, there's some way to rehabilitate someone. I haven't dealt with it very much because I've only dealt with a handful of divorces in my limited time as a priest. But in general, it's only the person who was cheated on, or someone who says they're cheated on, wanting to get the ecclesiastical divorce. Generally, if someone's a big old cheater, they're probably not that interested in lining up their affairs with the church anyway. So they're not going to be talking to me. Yes, Steve.
So, what you just read is whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery, because before God, she's still married to the man, right?
Right. If she's still married to the man, Jesus makes it clear here that there are circumstances under which a marriage can dissolve. That's why whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. So there is an except there. And actually Paul in the epistles gives other reasons for divorce, like unbelief on the part of the spouse. If one of the spouses is Christian, the other's not. And the fathers give other reasons. If for whatever reason, St. Augustine says, what if there's a woman who says, I'll only stay married to you if you earn a living by stealing, or tries to entice her husband to immoral acts. Well, then that's a situation when it's okay to divorce. So there are situations when divorce is possible, and this wouldn't apply. But I get this applies. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. That applies in a situation where the divorce was not legitimately, where the marriage was not legitimately dissolved by the church, because Christ acts through the church. That's when it's still adultery. So marriage can be destroyed. The traditional reasons are, the 3 A's: adultery, abuse, and abandonment. But most, other reasons like irreconcilable differences, that's the big one that we would say no. That's not, just not getting along with someone, that's not sufficient reason to divorce. But there are reasons to divorce. And there's I have a sheet in my office, well, not in my office, on my computer somewhere, all the reasons someone can get divorced in the Orthodox Church. There's like 10 or 12 of them. So there's a lot of complex life situations that arise because, the church has existed for 2,000 years and everything under the sun has had to happen. Has had to be dealt with. So 10 or 12 different reasons someone can get divorced legitimately. But Jesus is basically saying that that's really the ultimate last resort nuclear option. Divorce is very, very negatively looked at. But one thing the fathers talked about is that one of the reasons divorce was permitted in the ancient times before Christ is because people in that days were so barbaric that they were prepared to abuse or kill their wife if they couldn't divorce her. So the Moses gave them the ability to get divorced to prevent. It was always, even if Moses gave them these laws that seem kind of bad to us, it was always preventing a greater evil. So that's always something we need to keep in mind. And also, just one last comment: whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Keep in mind, a man could marry a woman who's divorced without knowing it. She could lie to him. And it reminds us of this way that sin can stain even innocent bystanders. It's just the nature of sin. We have a very modern legalistic conception of sin, that sin really only affects the person who commits the sin and the person against whom the sin is committed. And the reality is, it's all sin kind of has this sort of contagious effect. We are affected by other people's sins who we don't even know, and other people who we've never met are affected by our sins. Just keep in mind that this is the nature of things, and that's why Christ had to come on the cross to take away all sin, to sort of absorb it into himself. Any questions about this? So extremely high view of marriage among Christians. An extremely negative view of divorce. Yeah.
It was really stacked against everybody. And just a little bit that we talked about, going back, you were talking about pornography and the iconography of Satan. I mean, he's really stacked the deck the entire You can't walk into a Walmart. You can't go down to Kroger without seeing somebody's boobs hanging out. Or their clothing so ridiculously pulled.
Right.
Or their entire crotch is like, yeah, it's ridiculous.
It is wild.
Walmart
Television.
is worse than Kroger, but Walmart you can see some really crazy stuff. It's like, and now you're telling us that we're affected by their sins. I don't want to be affected by their sins.
I know. I don't either. I don't. You know,
go to Walmart and be sinning just because somebody else has already sinned in front of me.
It's a daily battle, but we know it's true. I mean, all of us. I think all of us have had the experience where we've come across some image or something that we weren't looking for, that we weren't trying to engage with, but somehow it just popped up, and all of a sudden we're affected. You know, we didn't ask for it, we didn't want it, but boom, there it is. And so that is the reality of it. Jesus tells us how things are, whether we like it or not. This is the way the world is. We need to be equipped to deal with that. Yeah.
Does all this about marriage only apply to marriage consecrated by the church?
That's a really good question, and I have complicated thoughts about that. I want to say actually no, because marriage is something very basic that existed among human beings before the Orthodox Church was around to provide sacraments. So even Adam and Eve were married in the garden. And you could also just look at it, you know, like imagine a culture where there's, you know, no orthodoxy at all, like Japan and China, where, you know, very, very few people are Christians. You have these couples who've been together for 50 years, you know, built a family, a life together. They've never cheated on each other. What are you saying? Like from the Christian perspective, or are they fornicators? Are they living in sin? No, come on. They're living out something basic and something fundamental that was established by God, even if they didn't recognize it as such. So no, in a sense, the Orthodox Church. Now, if you're an Orthodox Christian and you choose to get married outside of the church, then you're out of communion with the church, and you can't take communion until you get married in the church. But there is a sense in which all human beings have some concept of marriage, and all of this about adultery applies to them as well. You know, we can say it's the law written on their hearts. Just like all human beings, even if they've never heard of Moses or the Torah, know that killing is wrong to some greater, or at least murder is wrong. Let's say that. Not all, sometimes killing is a necessary evil, but murder, what we'd call murder, is always wrong.
Murder is everything. And I mean, that's what you were just going over when we first started. As being angry, you know, I stepped on Chris's shoe on the way out of the church, and he's angry because it's scuffed up now, and you know, he really wants to give one to me, but you know, he's being a good Christian and holding that inside. He's still thinking the thought.
Yeah, so
know.
the killing that's not murder that I was thinking of in the Father's comment on specifically is generally like we're talking about the death penalty. You know, like even the Bible provides for a lot of situations actually where a criminal offender has to be killed, and that's not a sin on behalf of the executioner or on the king who signs the order or whatever. So that would be a situation where killing is not murder. But that can be done passionlessly. You can say, without hatred or anger in your heart, you can say this person needs to go for the good of the people or the good of the society. Yeah, exactly. You can actually sorely regret it, and you can say, oh, I hate that I have to do this, but I have to do this because it's commandment. You know, what?
Just like punishing a child.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy actually, because I have to punish my children sometimes, and I hate it. I usually hate it. Sometimes I'm mad. But yeah, it's really difficult, and I think that would probably be the proper impulse of someone who's a king or a leader according to the Bible, who has to kill. Probably, maybe he hates it every time, but yes.
I imagine it would be like righteous anger, like performing something, using anger, but just to prevent a greater evil.
Right.
And, like,
Right.
When you're raising a child, you don't want them to, you know, don't touch the stove. You get a little angry, like, don't touch the stove,
Right.
because you're gonna burn yourself. It's like just preventing a greater evil.
Right. There's righteous anger too. If you're seeing some terrible evil act being committed against someone, it's probably righteous. It's a situation where killing would not be evil, it would be righteous. You know, if someone's, I don't know, trying to hurt a child or something, and you just shoot them, boom. you probably feel anger at that moment, but it might be mostly justified anger, mostly blessed anger, because you are protecting the innocent and the weak.
Getting cut off at the red light.
That's that's not
No
justified.
guns at the red light.
Okay, right. Right, well,
That's a hard one too.
I know.
Okay. Again, you have heard it that it was said of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. So Jesus, I think this is an extension of I believe it's the 9th commandment. You shall not bear false witness. So to bear false witness is generally a commandment, is understood to be a commandment against lying, but specifically what it's talking about is false witness is lying under oath. You're testifying in a court of law. You've taken an oath that you're telling the truth and you lie. Perjury, I think is the modern legal term. And so that's what Jesus is talking about here. So he's still on the 10 commandments, and he's extending to the inner dimension. So it's not just it's not just about not lying when you're under oath, but it's about not lying at all. Just be an honest person. When you say yes, mean yes. When you say no, mean no. And one of the things that some of the fathers were pointing out that I thought was so insightful and that I never thought about before, but for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. And they made the point that oaths, the very idea of having an oath or swearing is only necessary for people who are habitually dishonest. Why do we swear an oath? Because I really want you to believe me. No, I promise I'm telling the truth this time. Well, why does that matter unless I'm admitting that sometimes I don't tell the truth, right? In a society where every single person was honest all the time, no one would ever swear and no one would ever take oaths because they wouldn't need to have this special form of speaking for when they actually mean to be honest versus when they're just casually being honest. I thought that was very interesting. I didn't think about it. Oaths only make sense among people who are unreliable. In heaven there's going to be no oaths because people are just going to say things how they are. There'll be no capacity for deception. So just as rules regarding anger and lust were extension of those commands, this is an extension of the rules against perjury. It's not just about lying under oath; it's about never lie ever. It's in these. What are these specific things? Do not swear by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, or by your head. It seems this may be referring, based on some commentaries, there may have been this tendency to swear by certain things that weren't God. So then you could take it less seriously. So I could swear by heaven or by earth, but as long as I'm not swearing by God, my oath, I don't have to take it too seriously. It's like a light oath. I'm swearing, I swore, but I just swore by Jerusalem, so it's okay that I lied. And I think that's the tendency. This is maybe something that doesn't exist in our society, but this is Jesus talking about a particular tendency that maybe existed back then to take like oaths that they, with your fingers crossed or whatever. It's because I swore against something, because I swore, but I swore about something lesser, then I can break it. He says, no. Heaven is God's throne, and earth is his footstool, and Jerusalem is the city of the great king. All these things are sacred, and all of your oaths are binding if you take them by that. Keep in mind, Jesus says, do not swear at all. There are always provisions for all of these things. So we have in Galatians 1:20, St. Paul swears by God. He swears by God that he's not lying. Well, is St. Paul violating Jesus's commandments? Well, no, he's not. First of all, he's not swearing by heaven or earth or Jerusalem or anything. He's swearing by God itself. So he's taking a really serious form of oath. But second of all, this can be understood. Just there are situations where we might take oaths in our lives, especially I think people who serve in the military take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. You might, a secular court of law might ask you to take an oath. I think there's some like sectarian groups of Christians, maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe someone else who like literally will not swear any kind of oath at all because of these verses, and that's a little extreme. Yes.
You have to swear like 15 oaths to buy a gun.
Really?
I'm not using drugs. I'm not under indictment for a crime or whatever.
Well,
You have to swear like
you can buy a gun, Jackson. There are provisions for that. But let your it's not categorically never ever take an oath ever, but it's be very serious and be very simple in your in your words. Be a person of integrity and honesty. Be someone who says what they mean and means what they say. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. This should be very basic to us. And I think it's something you'll notice if you spend some time among like monastics, like, monks and nuns. They'll speak very directly, sometimes to the point that it's like a bit rude, because I think, many of them don't even do what we would call, like white lies or something. They just speak very directly or very plainly. They let their yes be yes and their no be no. And it's actually a little, can be a little jarring for us who are used to a little more dishonest, polite society like we are. But that's the Christian ideal is we should just be simple. We should be no frills, no caveats, no nuances. We just tell the truth. We tell things like they are, without the intention of without intentionally hurting some people. But sometimes, just by talking, you end up hurting people. And, it is what it is. It can't always be controlled for, and it doesn't mean you're guilty of a sin. There's no commandment not to hurt people's feelings. There's no commandment to be nice, because there's situations where it's not appropriate to be nice, and there's situations where doing the right thing will hurt people's feelings. In general, it's good to be polite. In general, it's good not to offend people, but that's not categorically true at all places and all times. Okay, that's about it for me. Is there anything anyone wanted to say or comment or question? I know I couldn't fill out a full hour for it, but I just I couldn't. Yes.
It's like a lie about like something that's your personal business,
Yeah.
or like just something that isn't relevant to them for them to know, or should we just say it's none of your business?
No, there are definitely situations where even saints and holy people, tell some types of white lies. So, for instance, one of the things is it's not generally good to talk about your own personal spiritual experiences, so you don't get puffed up with pride. So a lot of times I've heard stories, saints would tell a story about a miracle or something, and actually St. Paul does it in one of the letters to the Corinthians. He tells it in the third person. I knew a man in Christ who was taken into the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. He was talking about himself, but he didn't want to brag about it. So he told. So there are situations where, again, everything is to a certain degree contextual. There are situations where you don't have to tell the direct truth, but in general, we need to be more honest than we generally are, just as people or as society. And we need to be more direct and more plain, and that is a good rule. Yes.
So when we die, if all these unknown sins that have been committed around us and that we've committed inadvertently just by walking into Walmart and somebody hanging out of their shirt, and if your sins equal more than your good deeds on your deathbed, that's not fair.
Well, it's not a happy situation, but really we have the ultimate trump card, which is baptism and confession. Not a single sin which occurred before your baptism will be held against you. Not a single sin you've confessed it will be held against you as long as you sincerely repented, or sincerely struggled, or sincerely tried to repent. So, and on the one hand, there's no possible way any of us could be saved. It's just too bad. We're too stained. And on the other hand, we have the infinite grace of Jesus Christ, the ultimate trump card of Jesus's death on the cross. As long as we appropriate that to ourselves through the sacraments of baptism and confession, we're good. We're clean as a newborn baby. So don't despair too much. Just, have a spiritual life and you'll be okay.
Baptists have got it so wrong. We've always been, they got it so wrong. We've always been told as soon as you accept Jesus as your personal savior, just believing in him is enough that you'll make it to the gates of heaven. These poor people, all my life, I'd accepted that it was okay to have thoughts of murder as long as you weren't doing it.
Yeah.
because it was normal. It was okay. It was healthy. I've been told that. I've been told that by preachers. So long as you're thinking it and you're not doing it, it's okay. Everybody does it. It's healthy. It's safe. It's fine. I do it every day. I do it every day. I forget.
Well, there's a sense in which be aware. There's a sense in which it is normal. That doesn't mean it's good, but there's a sense in which it's normal. So you know, you don't want to beat yourself up about it excessively.
A lot of sinning. I do it every day.
I know, but you know, you can be purified and you can be cleansed and you can be, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the gospel, is that, you know, as long as you really attach yourself to Christ through the church and through the sacraments, you'll be good. You'll be good. Don't despair.
It's like you know, you'll stumble up with it, but don't get married to it. Don't get married to the sin.
Yeah. But even if you're married to the sin, get divorced from it. You know. Anastasia, you ought to raise your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to say, when you go to confession, you can, knowing that the situation is the way it is, that all the sin out there is cumulative and that it can attach to you and it affects you. You can also pray for sins that you don't know that you committed.
Yeah.
You can pray for anything in word, thought, or deed, and in ignorance or willingly.
You're absolutely right. That's a very good point. Confession covers all sins as long as you didn't deliberately hide any. So, you know, for all the sins I say in confession, there's a million evil thoughts I've had that I forgot to mention. There's a million little peccadillos I committed that I forgot to say in sin. Confession washes those, and you feel it. I mean, you feel it. Most of the time, not necessarily every time, but really, really often. Yes.
He comes in with a list, so I don't need a list.
You don't need a list, but it's helpful. If you want a list is helpful, and then you can destroy it or you can give it to the priest to burn it. But you don't need a list. It is not a requirement.
So what you forget,
as long as you didn't make yourself forget it or something.
I remember doing it 3 times, but you might have actually done it 11.
Right. That's covered. God's not this bean counter where he's trying to make sure, you know, he just wants to make sure you have sincere repentance for what you did. Yeah.
There's a habit you used to have, but you fully repented to yourself and just kind of past it. You still need to repent for those kinds of things that you.
We need to confess it.
Yeah.
You definitely need to confess it. But if it's done and you confessed it, that's it. Don't look back. You know, Lot's wife, she got turned into a pillar of salt because she looked back at Sodom. She was remembering her old sins and started to develop a longing for them. Just look forward, you know?
It's still there.
Yeah. I'm told that there's some rock formation which may actually be original Lot's wife. Yeah.
I mean, when it's weathered, you can't tell that it used to be a person.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure. But still, freaky. But that's Raven, did you mean to still have your hand up? Okay, she took it down. Okay. All right.
Well, I guess regarding repenting, how. I guess I need to. Is there a source I could read about to really know
what repenting is? Sure. Sometimes repenting just means not doing it again. Other times repenting needs more specific reparations. I'm told that the Holy Fathers say that if you've stolen, you got to give it all back. That's your repentance. Now maybe it gets to a point where it's not feasible if you've stolen some insane amount of money, but if obviously if you confessed adultery, you have to cut out the relationship, or else you never contact that person, or else you've not repented. So some sins, it's just just don't do it again. That's repentance. Other sins, it's you have to take certain steps, and that's repentance. It depends on what it is. All right, I'll still hang around for a little bit to answer questions, but I'll let everyone else go. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all people, a light to enlighten Gentiles and glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless you guys. Have a good day. Have a good night.